With great power comes great responsibility.
Compromise where you can. Where you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something wrong is something right. Even if the whole world is telling you to move. It is your duty to plant yourself like a tree, look them in the eye and say no. You move.
Never step onto the battlefield of ideas unprepared. Before you enter the fray, you need a plan. And there's no better place to get one than right here on Tactics with host Kaleb Colquitt. The Situation Room goes live now on News Radio 1440.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining me here on the program at Tactics, where speech isn't violence, tolerance isn't love, and disagreement isn't hate. We appreciate you making us a part of your day every day, whether you're joining us on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter, Twitch, Periscope. We're on all the platforms now, so if you're not watching us, that's really a you problem. And we do have a special program for you today. As always, it's Thursday, and we try to lead with local news like we do every day here on Tactics, and today is no exception. We have a guest in studio, which we were really excited about because originally this was going to be a phone interview, but luckily she was able to fit us into her busy day. We welcome back to the program a longtime friend of the program, Becky Gerritson of Eagle Forum, Alabama. Welcome in, Becky.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here in person, better than the phone.
Oh, absolutely. And we always love it whenever you can make time for us, but you just happened to be in town today and was able to come by because we know you're usually in Wetumpka.
Yes.
But since you're here, I know that the pressing issue right now is that this just happened. You actually just came from the Capitol, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, the Gordon Persons building for the Alabama State School Board meeting today.
Mm-hmm. And building I'm very familiar with because I was in FFA, and that's where all the education stuff happens, right there in the Persons building.
The missing persons building, right?
That's what they could definitely call it that. So tell us what exactly happened, because I know they just took the vote. So just give our listeners a little bit of the background, and we'll sort of try to get an explanation there.
Okay. Every 6 years, we get a new course of study for math. And this was the year for us to get new standards for math. Mm-hmm. And they were presented to us. The final version has taken them about a year to get there, but the final version was produced about a month ago. We went through these standards one by one and actually put them on the document in front of you on the left side of the page. And then we went to the Common Core State Standards website, pulled those standards off and laid them side by side on the document in front of you. And then we highlighted where they're the same.
Right.
And it is extremely obvious that these are very much Common Core. Many places it's exactly word for word, definitely use the same phrases, but they've changed the sentence now to be bullet points. Same exact words, but it's not in a sentence form anymore. It's now in bullet points. Or they've switched the front part of the sentence to the back or the back to the front.
Right.
So today they had a school board vote. There were 8 people that voted today, including the governor. And these standards were voted in. So we are going to continue to have Common Core for another 6 years.
Now, especially in this state, and I know that you're really good about having your finger on the pulse of the voter base, especially in this area. Common Core, to just about everybody that I talk to, except for a handful of people, extremely unpopular.
Yes.
And so why is it that the politicians in this state feel that they are at liberty to do this? And I mean, apparently without worrying too much about the legal repercussions or the electoral repercussions of this.
They apparently believe this is the direction we need to go. How they've come to that conclusion after seeing what Common Core has done, not only in Alabama, but across the nation. Test scores have gone down in every state that has started with Common Core, which has been in place now for about 2012 is when the first real implementation, it was fully implemented. So we've had it here for 6 years, and we see it's a disaster. And one of the revisions on this new course of study is they went in and they removed all the words that said Common Core, like at the beginning of the document, because they know that word is a bad word. It's a stigma. You don't want to be associated with Common Core. So they tried to hide it by just deleting the words Common Core. And back when we first took this 6 years ago, they changed it from the Common Core state standards. They renamed it to the Alabama College and Career Ready standards.
Right.
But it's still Common Core. I mean, you can look at the website and you can look at the standards we're using. It's Common Core, and what you see in front of you is nothing new.
Right. It's the same thing. And if you are watching at home, and this is the advantage to having video now, you can look at it. I mean, that's just the highlighted region there on one page and the other, and it really is just word for word using the same stuff. All they've done is change some of the titles. They've changed the format a little bit, but it's all the same thing. Like you can, unfortunately, and you're very familiar with this as well. It's a common big government tactic to present you with something that is unpopular by just changing the name. I mean, that's how they got the Patriot Act too.
Yeah.
Well,
healthcare, Obamacare.
Yeah, you're unpatriotic.
Yeah.
Or the Affordable Care Act, like
Yes,
you just said.
right.
Well, it's affordable healthcare. Who doesn't want affordable
Right.
healthcare? And so it's the same thing. They found out the name is toxic, changed that, but left everything that we didn't
Exactly.
like about
Yeah.
it.
Now, I need to be very clear. These standards, in almost every case, even down to the same order as Common Core. I mean, they didn't even like try to switch up the order within the grades or anything. It's all the same. There are a few places where, like in kindergarten, they added a new standard, identify patterns. That's, they added that in. And in high school, they did add a new course, which is geometry and data analysis together.
Mm-hmm.
That has never been tried or proven except 50 years ago in the USSR. They had a course that looked just like it. It was such a disaster that they quickly got rid of it and went back to their old geometry. So we're going to be doing that in Alabama. So that is an addition. That is a new part of these standards. But when you look at high school algebra 1 and 2, pre-calc, again, it's almost word for word right out of Common Core.
So when it comes to something like this, one of the first reactions I have is, and just because I like to play devil's advocate, and you know that, what would you say to somebody that is just looking at this and saying, well, really the name is the only thing that was toxic. It was Common Core that was working. It was just the people that they're not educators and they don't know any better, and they just didn't see how beneficial Common Core was. And so they were trying to get the best of both worlds, get rid of the toxic sort of toxic ideas that get put in people's head when you say Common Core, but still keep the good standards that were under Common Core. What would you say to that person?
Okay, that's a great question. And I don't want to bore your listeners, so I'm going to try to be as quick about it.
I have a very smart audience. You'll be fine.
The standards were not good. And let me take you back to when you learned math. You learned how to carry and borrow, right?
Right.
Did you learn to memorize your times tables?
I did.
Okay. These are all basic things that we learned. The people that we sent to the moon, this is how they learned math.
Right.
Well, all of a sudden, when Common Core came along, they have decided that that's not good. Memorizing is just not good. We want students to know the why of what we do. Okay, I agree. We do want students to know that.
That's fine.
But they are focusing, when you're little and your brain development, it's not totally there when you're little. Memorization is important. It's easy to do. Kids pick it up really quick. They cannot take an abstract concept and figure it out in first grade. That comes later. What Common Core has done has reversed that. They're teaching these children these completely abstract ideas that parents who are engineers, who are doctors, they can't even help their elementary school kids with their homework. It's so hard.
Right.
A child's brain cannot handle it. And that's why you see such an increase with anxiety with students. Just an overall I hate math kind of attitude coming out of students. They have changed these standards, so they're not teaching the standard algorithms early, like carrying, borrowing, those types of things. That is the main problem. We need to get back to developmentally appropriate work that they can do. I am so there with the why. Of course we want them to understand why.
Well, sure.
But they can't get it yet. They're not developmentally ready. And if you don't know your times tables, you can't do algebra. So this is a very typical problem that happens in people's homes, and many people in your audience can identify with this. The son comes to his dad and says, I really need help with algebra. And the dad sits down and says, okay, let's look at this problem. The first part of it, what is 3 times 6? That's the first part of the algebra problem. And he says, I don't know, give me paper and pencil and I can figure it out. This is what's happening. Kids do not have the foundations from elementary school to go on to learn higher math in junior high and high school. And the the fact that they have moved these standards around and switched them up like this has put us, not only do we have terrible test scores, but we are 2 years behind top performing countries. In Singapore, in second grade, they know how to carry and borrow. They learn that. We don't even start really getting into it until fourth grade. But second graders are able to do it. Mm-hmm. We used to do it. But the geniuses in this country that are putting out Common Core think it's better to teach these kids how to think first, and they're not ready.
Well, and that's really the thing, because first of all, what you're talking about, for those of you that are unfamiliar with this, the development of the human mind, abstract ideas really don't come along until later. And so there's nothing wrong with the student. It doesn't matter how smart they are. Even ones that develop early, it's harder for them to grasp those concepts because the brain development doesn't come until a little bit later. And so it seems to me that we're kind of cutting off the bottom rung of the ladder and then wondering why they can't reach the ladder that's 2 feet above their head. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so there is that, but also you would think that a bunch of math people, this is what I would assume, would be a little bit more results oriented. Like they would look at what works and what doesn't and see that this is clearly not making our students better, and they would reverse it. I was reading a report, I want to say about a month ago, that since Common Core was implemented in the United States, our test scores have fallen in every single demographic that we've done compared to other countries. Yes.
And this is the first time in American history that test scores have gone down. Now, ever since we started keeping track of scoring with the National Assessments of Educational Progress, we see every year there's little gains. Sometimes it's not much, but we have always, the trajectory was we were going up.
Right.
Forever. Until Common Core came down. That is the first time we have seen test scores begin to go down. So one of the other things about Common Core that is so unfortunate is in the testing, it doesn't matter if you get the right answer. If you don't get it the way they want you to get it, if the process is wrong, the answer is wrong. Now, in real life, I don't care how you figured out 3 times 6. If you counted on your fingers, if you knew it by memory, if you had some little trick that you used, I don't care. The answer is what I care about. But they focus so much on making the kids learn this abstract process that they're just missing. They're missing the point of why we're doing what we're doing.
Well, and that's the thing too. And I think that just going out of the direct look at what math does, it also takes you out of, I think that teaches them an incorrect life lesson, which is be results oriented. Because if it's all about the process, and as long as your process was right, it doesn't matter if you came to the right answer. Now, I have no problem with a math teacher giving partial credit or something like that. That's fine. But saying that, it doesn't really matter whether you got the right answer or not, as long as the process was good. Well, no, that's not how the real world works.
Exactly.
So, if you would kind of wade into the politics of this just for a second, because I know that there's probably a lot of audience members that, they don't have, it's the holidays. They don't really feel like they have time to keep up with this. Honestly, I do this for a living, and I feel like sometimes I don't have time to keep up with this. So why is it that the legislature isn't in session? How could we even approve these standards at this time? How did that happen?
Okay, so by law, it is the actual state school board that votes on these standards. The legislature has no authority over them in the matter of what we saw happen today with the vote.
Right.
So there's nothing we can do at this point. I mean, the school board did their job and they voted in standards, whether we like them or not. And that's just legally, that's how the process works. So that's it. And the governor does have a vote. So let me tell you how the vote went down, if I may.
Right. It was 5-3, right?
It was 5-3. And the governor is one of those. So she voted for these standards. The only 3 that voted against these standards, it was Stephanie Bell, Jackie Ziegler, and Wayne Reynolds from Huntsville. All the others campaigned on the promise that they would vote to get rid of Common Core.
Well, they did vote to get rid of the label Common Core, so I guess technically...
Yeah, you're right. So maybe we should have been a little more explicit. Well, what exactly do you mean by that? But we saw today, they showed the state of Alabama that they don't honor their promises.
True.
Because it was, they had this paper right in front of them showing them it was Common Core, and it didn't matter. I'm dumbfounded. I can't understand how you can look at that and say this is a good thing and we need to keep doing it.
Well, I don't either, Becky, and I hate to be dystopian about this, but I think that as well as I do, come election time, most people probably aren't going to think about it. They're not going to remember it. And I mean, I hate it. It drives me crazy.
They will be told, and you all will be told, we don't have Common Core in Alabama. I hear that all the time.
Oh, I guarantee you, they will campaign on, I'm one of the ones that got rid of Common Core. I voted for the new standards.
Exactly. That's exactly what they're going to say. And I wish everyone just had one of these in their pocket and could say, oh, really? Then why do they read exactly like Common Core standards?
Well, see, and that's the thing. You remember that we started out this interview and I was talking about how really they were just more concerned with getting rid of the label, and that because the average voter, unfortunately, and I'm not talking about people that listen to this program, because if you listen to this program, you're probably pretty nerdy about politics, but the average voter is not going to dig into it enough to know that there is a difference. And the truth is they didn't dig into it enough at the first time to even know why the standards were bad. They just knew Common Core sounded bad to them because it's Obama stuff. And so let's just get rid of that. And so I really do think, unfortunately, this is the government that we deserve because it's the one we vote for. Yeah,
I agree with you. Now, there is a vote coming up on March 3rd that has a lot to do with Common Core standards. May I talk about that for a minute?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Go ahead. I was actually going to ask. That was my next question is there anything that we can do now since the vote's already gone through?
So the only statewide constitutional amendment we have on the March 3rd ballot is to get rid of the school board as an elected board, and it will become an appointed board by the governor. The entire state will be voting on that on March 3rd. There are a lot of states that have an appointed board. It's kind of unusual to have a board set up like ours. I think we're only one of 6 states, but all the research shows you cannot talk about academic success. It makes no difference what type of setup of a board you have.
Right.
But our politicians are telling us we must get rid of our elected board. They're too stupid. The governor should be appointing the experts. So this is what we're going to be voting on.
Right, because Kay Ivey's such a genius when it comes to education.
Well, and who's going to be the next governor?
No, I know.
You don't know.
But here's the thing. Whether it's a governor you like or not, and this has just been my experience because I'm the son of a teacher. My sister was a teacher for a while. I was even a teacher for a little while. And, I'm pretty deeply entrenched in this. And I've never seen a governor of the state of Alabama that had any idea what they were doing when it came to education, even the ones I liked. I might like some of their policies, but Bob Riley is the first one that comes to mind. His big idea for education is let's make them go to school longer. Thanks, Bob.
Right.
But anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so there's something about this amendment that your listeners and watchers need to be aware of. In the bill for this amendment, they put in there that now in our Constitution, it will read specifically that we must have we must have course of study standards that ensure nationwide consistency and a transfer from state to state. This amendment that we will be voting on is going to stamp that into our Constitution. So if we see the whole nation's going down with Common Core, and that's what the national standards are, that's Common Core, and we want to get out of it, sorry, Alabama, you just tied your hands and you've got to do what the national standards, you have to do what they want to do.
So if I'm understanding this right, what this would basically do is put our system on autopilot to whatever the nation decides.
You got it. You got it in a soundbite, and you need to be telling everybody they need to vote no. And I have all the documentation. I sat in the senator's office when this bill was being drafted. He called Eagle Forum and he said, hey, we want to talk to you about this bill. We want to show you what we're doing. Here's why we're doing it. That's all great. We saw this language specifically and said, no, take this language out. They said no. And I said, look, we'll offer substitute language. We have language that's better than this. Basically saying we ensure that we'll have standards that make Alabama students good citizens. That's basically what it said. It was a little more detailed than that, but it was safe. They said no to that. So I asked them later, the day of the vote on the legislative floor, I said, what happened to our language? Why would you not put our language in there? Because I explained, this is going to tie our hands. You know that, right?
Right.
Of course they know it, but they don't want to admit it. And he said, well, we showed that to the department and it scared the hell out of them. I'm like, so making good students, good citizens, having standards that ensure that we have good students, good citizens scared the hell out of them?
If I could, it sounds to me that the primary concern here is covering their own behind, because based on your characterization of it, and I have no reason to believe that it's anything less than true, it sounds like what they're trying to do is put in unelected bureaucrats that answer to no citizen of the state of Alabama other than the governor herself, and then put the entire system on autopilot.
Yes.
So if they do this, because to me, even implementing these standards that are just Common Core with a different name, that is a signal to the voter, look, we don't think you're intelligent enough to call us on this. We think that we can literally just change the heading of the standards, call it something completely different, and you're too stupid to realize that we just duped you. And now they're going to do it in perpetuity to where they never have to be held accountable for it at any point. Exactly. And they put the whole thing on autopilot so that they never have to do it. And
once you have something in the Constitution, you can't get it out. I mean, it's almost impossible to remove something from the Constitution.
No, it is.
It is very dangerous.
There's a reason we have 900 freaking amendments to the thing.
Well, and, this is kind of how I think. I want our state to be leading in education. I want to see us get good standards that are proven, that are evidence-based. We've got them. We've showed the State Department many options of good standards that we could use right now, that even have textbooks ready. They have teacher training available. They don't want any of that. They want Common Core. And I'm just, Kaleb, No,
I know that it absolutely drives me nuts, because especially in the state of Alabama, and I know that this isn't in our area specifically, but we've got a handful of areas, Huntsville specifically with the Space and Rocket Center, Birmingham with UAB. Auburn is really up and coming. It's one of the fastest growing areas in the entire country. And even Enterprise. I mean, they have a phenomenal school system. They're a growing community. People are starting to move to here. We've got businesses coming in. Like, Alabama is at a crossroads right now. We have the potential to really take off. And I know that we're tired of being at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to education. I am too. That's a position I sympathize with and want us to be better in.
Right.
What we're literally saying is, we're going to keep the status quo. We are going to put it into law that whatever standard someone else decides for us, we're just going to do that. It's impossible to grow that way.
Yeah, Kaleb, and what I was thinking too is, we're leading the nation. Hey, get it into your own constitutions, everybody. Let Alabama be the first one to do it. And so we're actually putting it in our Constitution. So March 3rd, you need to vote no on Amendment 1.
If you care anything at all about states' rights, federalism, or the 10th Amendment, this is a fight we cannot afford to lose.
And you know what? I don't care. If you were to ask me about this amendment and what it's about, okay, elected, appointed, of course I want an elected board. But, many states have an appointed board and they do fine, whatever. You can't base your academic success on that. But that's one thing. But this part of that amendment is what I care about, is that we do not need to cement this into our Constitution and tie our hands to whatever the federal government's going to be doing. And as we progress, as we are throughout this nation, we're getting more and more federal government control. And
well, to anybody that would oppose that, I would just say, in the 1960s, America was the undisputed champ when it came to education. We had, by any standard that you could measure a country by, we were leading the world in every single department when it came to education. And then Washington got involved, and now we're 27th. So if you want to make that the standard for Alabama that we're tied to.
After Common Core, we're 52nd in math.
Well, I was talking about overall. And
country-wise.
Okay. I was talking about overall, and I was talking about, every standard put together. We were 27th. But anyway, so Washington has clearly shown a decades-long pattern of failing at this. Why would we want to hitch our wagon to them and say, you know what, whatever you guys decide, we're doing that? That's absolute insanity.
It is.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming by, Becky.
You
brought a lot of really important things to our attention, and hopefully we'll have you back a couple more times to discuss this.
Absolutely. There's a lot to discuss, and we need to keep this in front of people's faces as we enter the new year, because the vote will be very soon on March 3rd.
Right. And the primary thing that I would say to my audience is, please don't let this fade out of your memory. Remember this when you go to the polls, because the truth is, I know I hate it. It drives me crazy. I know that you're the same way, but ultimately, these people are politicians, and the only thing they care about is keeping their job. So if you make them feel threatened in their job, they might actually do some of the things that we're talking about. Thanks so much, Becky. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. We'll be back in just a minute.
Hey, where you going? Champ? Slugger? Hey, cowboy. Where you going? Where you going?
I'm going out!
All right, here we are. So you guys remember last year, one of the things I talked about in a segment called Straw Wars is how the liberals, despite no scientific evidence or backing whatsoever, believe that somehow they are saving the sea life by banning plastic straws. In response to this, Mellow Mushroom has started giving out paper straws as opposed to plastic straws. So what we're going to do is we're going to see how effective the paper straws are with the most difficult drink to drink, a milkshake. Let's see how this stands up. All right, so first of all, I got about 2 sips out of that, and the paper stuck to my lips. This thing does not work too well. Boy, it'd take you 2 hours to drink this with this.
Well, see, I'm using plastic.
That's John from Millbrook, by the way. He's
I
the one
don't care.
driving.
I think they use plastic because that's the best thing to use.
This thing sucks. Well, actually, it doesn't suck. If it sucked, I'd be fine with it, but it doesn't. This milkshake will melt before I finish this. All right. Experiment over. It's biodegradable. All right. We're going to fix this now. There we go. Good old petroleum-based plastic straws. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Oh, that's so much better.
I got a question about this.
Oh yeah?
With the paper, aren't they concerned about the trees, having to cut down the trees to make the straws too? Is that not a...
Well, that's one of the points that I made. It doesn't matter what you make the straw out of. You're expending some kind of resource.
Well, yeah, because we all live here.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, it doesn't matter what you make any product out of. You're expending some kind of resource. Mm-hmm. And that's true of straws or anything else. Well, I tell you this. Just based on this little experiment, I know that I saw that Disney is planning to go completely paper straw by 2020 on all their cruise lines and all of their amusement parks. I contend that Disney World is not the happiest place on earth if I can't drink a Dead Blame milkshake while I'm there.
But I will, to their defense, say one thing.
Oh?
You can take a pocket knife in. So help me.
That's something.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right, so even though this went about the way I expected it to, paper straw experiment failed miserably. I imagine if I had left it in there much longer, it would have dissolved. I had a buddy the other day that went to a place that used paper straws. He said he had to order 6 different straws throughout the course of his meal because they kept dissolving on him. Which I'm sitting there thinking, you can't tell me that using 1 plastic straw is worse for the environment than 6 paper straws. I mean, that's just common sense. Anyway, all right, thanks, guys. I'm going to enjoy the rest of my milkshake.
And welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us through the break. And we do have quite a lot of news to get to this week. You know, I was actually mentioning to one of my buddies here, he's a student here at Faulkner that is he's kind of into politics and has some interest in it. We have experienced a really strange phenomenon. because I've been in the news business now directly for 4 years. Indirectly, I've been paying attention to the news for a really long time, but I've actually been a broadcaster charged with covering the news now for 4 years. And one thing that you notice, and everybody in the media knows about this, it's a very common thing. We actually make plans around it because it's so reliable, is in the news business, you plan on there being a lull between Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's. We call it the turkey coma. I mean, everybody in the media knows about this, that about 3 days before Thanksgiving, the news starts slowing down a little bit. By the time Wednesday before Thanksgiving hits, it's pretty much slowed to a crawl. And it'll pick up a little bit after Black Friday, but really it just kind of chugs along and it's real mellow. And it's honestly hard to find news stories to cover and content in that time because there's just not that much going on most years. I've seen the exact opposite recently. Like, it just absolutely baffles me that this year we have had so much news to cover in this time of year. I've never seen it like this. Even in the Trump years, even with now election years are a bit different because there is some excitement about the election just happening because, elections usually happen early in November, but really even then there's a pretty significant pause that happens with the news. That's just not the case this year. I've seen just as much news coverage since Thanksgiving hit, since the week or two before it. And in fact, I've even seen an uptick by some measures. So it's just astounded me that we have, and a lot of it has to do with impeachment, and I get that, but that we've had so much news to cover these past couple weeks. But one of them, really big local story, and I could not be more sympathetic to this family. You know that a couple of days ago we talked about Kaleb Watson, Joshua Kaleb Watson to be more specific. He is the Navy officer that was killed at the Navy base and was the hero of the hour. He's from Enterprise, Alabama, and he actually went to find authorities after being shot multiple times. And we have a few more details on this, and that is via his family, who did an interview with Fox and Friends. So they do talk about something in a second that we're going to get into, but what I found really astounding is that we have a few more of the fine details based on what was going on in this story from his father who was talking about this. So this comes from his father, Ben Watson. This whole family, like I said, is from Enterprise, Alabama, so they are local. But on Fox and Friends, he said, sometime early in the morning, after 6 o'clock, we know that he was shot at least 5 times and then somehow found the strength, bleeding profusely, to make it out the door. Hail first responders, and then they came up to him and with basically his last breath summoned the courage to give them an accurate description of the shooter and his location so they could do their duty. You, sir, raised a hero. And I have no idea. I know that a lot of people across the state watch the show. I don't know if they are. I know most of my audience is in the Montgomery area. I have no idea if Mr. Watson is watching this or not. But, sir, I know that your family's in an incredible amount of pain right now. And believe me, my prayers and my heart go with you that you'll find comfort and strength in this incredibly dark time. But take solace in the fact that you raised a true patriot and a hero. Probably my favorite Bible verse in the entirety of Scripture comes from the Gospel of John, where Jesus is talking about himself and, of course, foreshadowing his own death. And he says, greater love hath no man than this, but to lay down his life for his friends. Now, if that's not the definition of what it means to be heroic, I don't know what is. The fact that he was willing to think not of himself or his own injuries or trying to stay still so that he doesn't bleed out anymore or anything like that, because of course that is true that if you're shot like that, you're supposed to stay down because you could bleed out more profusely if you start running and trying to move around. And rather than thinking of himself or his own hide, he decided he was going to do whatever it took to save more lives, save more of his brothers in arms there on that Navy base. And as much as I know that you'd rather have your son with you today, he did his duty. And I think that's a testament to the job that you did as a father. I don't know you from Adam, but this kind of character doesn't just come out of thin air. And I really do believe that you had a part to play in that. So thank you from me personally and from a grateful nation. As much as I wish that some of these policies were not in place that cost your son his life, and I wish that his sacrifice was not something that we had to talk about at all, I feel a great swell of gratitude for your family, not just the sacrifice of your son in the future and not being able to see him or be around him, but also the sacrifice of you raising him the right way, with a love of country, with a desire to serve others, that he obviously carried with him throughout his duty as a Navy officer. We appreciate it. And I wish there was more I could do. I really do. But at this point, that and my fervent prayers are all that I can offer. But I thank your family for producing somebody like Kaleb. And though I wish I didn't have to deal with this next part, I think that it's necessary. The older brother, Adam Watson, the older brother of Kaleb, he said this in the interview. These men and women are asked to go defend their country overseas or wherever, and my brother was an expert marksman. He was captain of the rifle team for the Navy. He was well qualified to have a firearm and defend himself. And if we're going to ask these men and women to stand watch for our country, they need the opportunity to defend themselves. This isn't the first time this has happened, and if we don't change something, it won't be the last. You know, this is what we would call common sense. I know that the left constantly freaks out anytime you even mention giving people guns. But even the vast majority of people on the left, people in the center, even people that are as pro-gun control as you can get, at least the ones that I've spoken to, will look at you and say, you mean to tell me that the best trained military on Earth isn't allowed to have firearms on their own base? Like, even the pro-gun control crowd looks at that and says, well, that policy doesn't make any sense. Of course, there's some that do support that policy. But the vast majority of people that are even very pro-gun control, and I've even had the conversation with some that go so far as want to ban the AR-15. So they're not exactly on our side when it comes to the gun debate. They'll say, well, yeah, of course the military should have firearms on them when they're on base. This is just such a no-brainer to me. And like I said, this kid that is no longer with us now, in part because of this policy, was somebody that was a marksman. He was on the rifle team at the Naval Academy. I have a feeling the standards to get on there are kind of high. And so the idea that him having a firearm wouldn't have helped in this situation, I don't understand. Every single time there is a mass shooting that fits the left-stream media's narrative, what they do is they immediately find the furthest left, the most pro-gun control family they can find, stick a camera in their face, and videotape them calling for gun control. Now, the difference here is this is a policy that very clearly would have made a difference in this scenario, because 99% of the time, when they show these families on programs like this, they're a family that, I mean, they're not political experts, and I'm not dogging them. It's just this is the base knowledge of the average person. they don't realize that their policies have been tried in places and did nothing to curb mass shootings or gun violence. And so I'm not trying to, go after a family that just lost a child. I'm just saying that when you're looking at their policy or their policy proposal in the wake of a tragedy that happens to their family, the media can't get enough of that. They eat it up, even though what they're saying doesn't make any sense when it comes to resolving or preventing the tragedy they just went through. This is a story that very clearly having firearms on the scene would have helped. I mean, this is a kid that was an expert marksman, and somehow he got shot 5 times and still found the strength to get up and go find help. And by the way, who did he go to resolve the issue, to bring down the bad guys? He found good guys with guns. Well, how much faster would a good guy with a gun been on the scene if he had had a gun on him? Well, he would have been on the scene immediately. And I have to believe that if this kid can take 5 gunshot wounds and still stand up and go find help, that he probably finds the strength to at least fire off a couple of rounds and give them, if nothing else, cover fire. And the other people that were shot and injured, 3 killed, 8 injured, I got to believe that at least some of them, they're Navy officers. They would have kind of been proficient with firearms, I would imagine. Could have delivered some return fire. Same thing at Fort Hood, where a very similar thing happened. A Muslim jihadist opened fire on military personnel on a base, and they were all unarmed because that's our policy for some reason. I mean, here you have a situation where it very clearly would have made a substantial difference. That's the difference in what's going on here in this interview with this family and the interviews that you usually see with families when it comes to mass shootings, whether it be at a school or a church or something else, no matter what the event is. That's the difference here. And I don't know. I mean, you can't always deal with what if scenarios. I'm not going to definitively say that if everybody on the scene would have been armed, that this wouldn't have happened. But if they had been armed, since these Saudis were people that were training on this military facility, I think they would have known that the people were armed. And so even if they tried to do this with a 45 Glock that they did, a 9mm firearm, even if they had tried to do this, there would have been some return fire. And even if we had had some casualties or some deaths, I can guarantee you it wouldn't have been as bad as it was, because he could have returned fire. And the idea that we are keeping our military personnel from doing this is just absolutely beyond me. Here's the thing. Even though I fully endorse this message, I couldn't agree with it more. It's just completely asinine to me that we do this in the first place and disarm our own military when they're on base. Even with all that being true, here's the thing. None of this should matter. And the reason I'm saying none of this should matter is because as bad as that policy is, and it's bad, the policy that makes even less sense to me is that we're bringing Saudi citizens, members of their military, over here to train. That makes no sense to me. And what we should have done is never had that policy in the first place, and then it wouldn't have mattered because they wouldn't be over here and know where our military installments are to be able to do this in the first place. Now, maybe they get over on some kind of visitor's visa and do that, but the point is, we facilitated bringing these guys here at our expense. And this is what happened. So whether or not military people should be armed on base, as ridiculous as it is that they're not, that argument aside, that shouldn't matter because they should have never been in the United States in the first place. Now, another bit of local news. I'm going to give praise to somebody that I very rarely give praise to. But I do believe in the philosophy of Abraham Lincoln. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, Abraham Lincoln once said, "I will stand with any man when he is right." And I genuinely believe in that. I think that it's even more important for us to praise our enemies, praise those who oppose us when they do something right, because if not, they have no incentive to ever do anything right. And even though I really dislike this guy, I can't wait for him to be out of office, which will happen very quickly. I'm going to give props to Doug Jones because he sponsored a bill and got support for it, and he actually did something right. Normally, the things that Doug Jones tries to get organized in the Senate, I'm not in favor of, but this one, yes, absolutely. Round of applause to Doug Jones. Well done, Senator. And the reason that I say this is this bill that he brought out there, it gives survivors' rights to Gold Star families. So I don't really understand all of the ins and outs when it comes to military families and how they receive their benefits, but basically my understanding of this bill is that it gives full survivor rights to those. So, for example, if there is a family, a military family, where a soldier, say, steps on an IED and then has lost his leg or lost both legs, there are certain rights when it comes to the VA and getting pay for that family that are not afforded to soldiers that give the ultimate sacrifice. Those same benefits are not extended. There are benefits extended, but not to the extent of somebody that gets injured. And that's just based on my understanding of it. I know that there's a lot of military people in the audience, so if you want to correct me on that or give me a little more insight, feel free to do so. You can do that at Tactics Radio. As always, just tweet me. But when it comes to this, Doug Jones apparently is doing something really good, and something that I never thought Doug Jones would do. He's actually trying to offer a tax break to people. So one of the things that he is included in this bill that he is sponsoring is that Gold Star families, the widows or widowers of service members that have died, they actually get benefits in the form of tax breaks as well that they previously did not have access to. So they're actually paying less in taxes because of that, which I'm in favor of just about anybody paying less in taxes. Like, it is very rare that you'll be able to come up with a proposal that says, hey, Caleb, we should keep the taxes at the same rate they are or raise them. I'm pretty much always going to be opposed to that, but almost anybody, you say we're going to lower the taxes on them, that gets a big thumbs up from me. So props to Doug Jones. I mean, I didn't expect that when I woke up this morning to be praising Doug Jones, but there he is. Well done, Senator. I appreciate it. If you did more stuff like this, I might even consider voting for you. You'd have to do a whole 180 when it comes to abortion at this point, but could happen. It could be possible. Anybody can change. I do believe in the power of change. One thing that I have been disgusted about, though, and this goes outside the realm of local politics, we're going into national news. Because of the impeachment, the Inspector General's report has been somewhat glossed over, and it is just a crying shame that it happened at the same time both as the impeachment and the not only the impeachment hearings, but also the turkey coma that I was discussing earlier, where everybody just kind of goes to sleep in that gulf between Thanksgiving and New Year's. And so it's a shame that it's come out here, but the reason that that's so bad is that I think that since the American people have a real issue with nuance and actually digging into a story, this would be true no matter when it came out, but it's especially true now because the media has been able to paint a very convenient narrative. I don't know how many headlines I've seen. It's like IG report and then in parentheses, no political bias, and that's it. Or something of that nature, something very similar to that. But here's the thing. If you dig into this thing, if you dig into the actual content of what the Inspector General's report actually says, Horowitz is very clear. He's not saying that I can definitively say political bias was the reason they made decision X or decision Y, but he's making a case for pretty good circumstantial evidence that political bias was at the heart of it. And whether political bias was at the heart of it or not, it paints the Justice Department, which hurts me personally as an American citizen, as not only grossly incompetent, but with a distinct animus towards one side. And so when those headlines come out, what they're saying is, oh, well, he didn't prove that there was overt political bias in the decision-making process. Well, no, he doesn't, but there's a very strong suggestion of it. And whether there's a suggestion of political bias, there's certainly a suggestion that is very clear of animus towards Trump and people at multiple levels breaking their own rules in order to conduct an investigation into a presidential candidate in the 2016 election. So Ted Cruz goes through a little bit of this, and the truth is I could spend an entire show just going through and pouring through the IG report. There's a lot there, and I'm going to go over a little bit of it myself here. But Ted Cruz, just in the span of about 5 minutes, and we're going to look at several of the individual clips, Ted Cruz just destroys any notion that a person might have. It's like, oh, well, this report basically said there's nothing to see here. No, the report says anything but that. Here's Senator Ted Cruz speaking with Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General, about his report.
So the men and women at home need to know what's happening. A lawyer at the FBI creates fraudulent evidence, alters an email. That is in turn used as the basis for a sworn statement to the court that the court relies on. Am I stating that accurately?
That's correct. That is what occurred.
Now, you have worked in law enforcement a long time. Is the pattern of a Department of Justice employee altering evidence and submitting fraudulent evidence that ultimately gets submitted to a court, is that commonplace? Is that typical?
I have not seen an alteration of an email end up impacting a court document like this.
In any ordinary circumstance, if a private citizen did this, fabricated evidence, and by the way, what he inserted was not just slightly wrong, it was 180 degrees opposite what the evidence said. So the intelligence agency said this guy is a source, and he inserted this guy is not a source. If a private citizen did that in any law enforcement investigation, if they fabricated evidence and reversed what it said, in your experience, would that private citizen be prosecuted for fabricating evidence, be prosecuted for obstruction of justice, be prosecuted for perjury?
They certainly would be considered for that if there was an intentional effort to deceive the court. On this, I'm going to defer because, as we noted here in the sentence you indicated, we referred that over to the Attorney General and the FBI Director for handling.
All right, so part of the reason that is so incredibly significant, and this is the case that Ted Cruz is making, it would be illegal for anybody to tamper with evidence and turn it in as though it were evidence, specifically and intentionally change it to say the opposite of what it normally said, and to turn that into a law enforcement agency submit it as evidence. That's illegal, and you would be considered for prosecution, as the IG just agreed to, no matter who you were. It is 1,000 times worse when the actual law enforcement people are the ones that are doing this. It's a really bad thing to plant evidence and try to get somebody that is innocent be proven guilty in a court of law if you're a private citizen. If you're a cop or a detective or a CSI person or a district attorney or a political figure that is charged with the public trust, with solving issues like this and taking cases like this, and you're the one planting evidence, that's about as bad as it gets. It's a complete mischaracterization. No, it's actually a complete abridgment of your oath of office. And in the case of these guys who are probably not elected officials, they are expected to know what the law is and to abide by it and to let the chips just fall where they may. When you're trying to stack the deck to get a specific result like this, when you're tampering with evidence trying to get a specific result from the FISA courts, it doesn't get much worse than that. And what's important to understand about this goes back to the Steele dossier. And the Democrats, for a long time after the Mueller report came out, tried to claim, oh, the Steele dossier had nothing to do with it. It wasn't even part of the... we all knew that was crap. Because, I mean, our own internal sources said that it was crap. Oh, that had nothing to do with it. There was nothing to it. That's not really where it started from. When it turns out they only had two sources, and one of the two sources was an article where they did an interview with Christopher Steele, who wrote the dossier. So they had two sources that was really just one source, that just in two different formats. And what Ted Cruz is specifically talking about there, if you've read the IG report, is that what they were doing is, in this communication, is they were saying, no, Chris Steele was not the source when it comes to this. And why was it important for somebody that was trying to skew the results and trying to get a specific result out of this? Why is it so important that they were trying to hide the fact that Steele was a source? Because here's the thing. Christopher Steele, and we know this from the Inspector General's report, was somebody who, prior to the investigation into the Trump Russia collusion, prior to that investigation being open, it turns out that the FBI had already marked him as a non-credible source. And the way that it works in the FBI, according to the rules, once you are no longer a source that they can use, you are essentially blackballed. They're not allowed to communicate with you. You're not allowed to communicate with them. That's how it works in the FBI. Once you have been proven, and the reason that he did that, the reason that he was blackballed from the FBI, and the reason the FBI said, nope, can't trust this guy anymore. If he puts evidence out there, if he gives us something, he is a non-credible source, is because he broke the rules. And what did he do to break the rules? He leaked to the media. That's what happened. That he broke the rules that he's supposed to. If he's going to be a source that's trusted by the FBI, he can't go around blabbing to the media all the time, because that, of course, brings all kinds of problems to the FBI. He didn't do that. He did leak this stuff to the media, and then the FBI said, can't use him as a source anymore. He broke our rules. And so then the FBI breaks its own rules. The people that were in charge of putting this whole thing together, they break their own internal rules, do use him as a source, and were then lying to other people in the FBI saying he was not a source. Now, you can't tell me that this was just an accident or incompetence. They were clearly trying to get a specific result, and they were willing to break the rules to get that result. That's what Ted Cruz is pointing to. That's why this is so egregious. Let's look at the second clip here.
Third major omission that the Department of Justice and the FBI did not tell the court is that this entire operation was funded by the DNC, was funded by the Hillary Clinton campaign and by Democrats. It was an Oppo research dump. Look, at some level, this is the most effective Oppo research dump in history, because the Department of Justice and FBI were perfectly happy to be hatchet men for this Oppo research dump. Now, throughout every one of the filings, DOJ and the FBI didn't inform the FISA court that this was being paid for by the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign. Is that right?
That's not in any of the FISA applications.
So they didn't tell the court that. And it's not like DOJ didn't know. Indeed, one of the senior Department of Justice officials, Bruce Orr, his wife worked at Fusion GPS, the Oppo research company being paid by the DNC. And he became the principal liaison with Steele without telling anyone at the Department of Justice that he was essentially working on behalf of the Clinton campaign.
So it is amazing looking through this thing how often people are literally in bed with each other. Like it's all a circle, it's all the same players, and that's what Ted Cruz is talking about here. That they just completely left out, oh, by the way, this thing that is the source of the entire investigation, this thing that we're going to use to justify getting a FISA warrant from a court so that we can use it as a means to look into a presidential candidate. Yeah, the whole thing was paid for as opposition research by the DNC. Bought and paid for by him. Hillary Clinton herself is paying for this. And Ted Cruz is exactly right. Like, at some level, this is the most effective opposition research that has ever been put together, because even though virtually nothing in it was true, it launched a 2-year investigation where we have spent $35 million in taxpayer money. Even though, and by the way, this is something that Ted Cruz doesn't mention, but it is also in the IG report, there was somebody internally at the FBI that was looking at the Steele dossier and saying, at the time, no, this thing's been completely discredited. We can't trust it. They had people actually look into whether or not the information inside the dossier was credible, and the FBI came back with no. And when they went to the courts, they just omitted that little detail. You know, it's funny because the IG's report, and Horowitz is a guy that just covers his own butt. I really don't think that that's always necessarily a bad thing, because at the very least, he's very clearly not playing for one side or the other. But the reason that I do get frustrated with it is that Horowitz, sometimes it seems as though he'll just go out of his way not to make waves. And that does tick me off, not because I'm wanting him to just go after the Democrats or anything like that, but I do want him to tell the truth. And sometimes it seems like he tries to, it's almost like a John Roberts ruling in the Supreme Court. He's trying to word things in such a way that it'll be as uncontroversial as possible, instead of just telling the truth and letting the chips fall where it may. But he does tell the truth. His conclusions just don't always comport with the facts that he includes in the report. But overall, this is still what is in the report that he is putting out there. This whole thing was bought and paid for by the Democrats, that there were people that looked into the Steele dossier and said, yeah, this thing's not credible at all. Like, we probably shouldn't trust it. And when they went to the courts to get a warrant to justify all this, they just left out all the details that would make someone suspicious of whether or not we should actually be spying on this presidential candidate. Somehow all the details that would have made it look like a flimsy case just magically got left out. And they're the only ones that got left out. But don't worry, there's no political bias or anything. It's not like they had something out for President Trump or had some reason to hide all these things from the court when going to them to try to get a warrant. They broke every rule in the book, and not somebody else's rules, their own rules that they wrote. It really is absolutely astounding. And Democrats, if you're sitting there and thinking, this guy's just a Trump hack and he's just doing the bidding for the president, first of all, with Inspector General Horowitz, that's clearly not true. He's worked for different administrations. But more than that, I don't know how many times I've said this. I'm honestly sick of saying it. Do you really think that if you reverse this, and I realize this is low-hanging fruit, if you reverse this and it was George W. Bush that had spied on President Obama when he was, in the process of trying to get elected, do you really think that they would just be fine with that happening if this whole thing were put in reverse? Because I don't buy that for a second. I don't believe for 1 minute that the media would have just been like, it's no big deal, and the Inspector General comes out with a report confirming all the rules were broken in order to get the warrant to look into it like that. And the media would have just been like, that's not such a big deal. I kind of feel like that would have been story of the year, and that we wouldn't have heard the end of it ever. We'd still be talking about it 8 years later. Well, now almost 11 years later. Maybe I'm wrong, but I really don't think I am. So this is the last part of Ted Cruz speaking to the Inspector General here.
Who at the Department of Justice was, and by the way, several Democrats, it's interesting seeing Democratic senators wanting to defend this abuse of power. Several senators, Senator Feinstein said, I wrote this down, the FBI didn't place spies in the Trump campaign. Senator Leahy said something similar. Well, that may be true, not spies in the Trump campaign, but reading from your report, in particular page 4 of the executive summary, your report says thereafter, the Crossfire Hurricane team used the intrusive techniques, including confidential human sources, to interact and consensually record multiple conversations with Page and Papadopoulos, both before and after they were working for the Trump campaign, as well as on one occasion with a high-level Trump campaign official who was not the subject of the investigation. So they didn't place spies in the campaign, but they sent spies to record senior members of the campaign in the middle of a presidential campaign when that candidate was the nominee for the other major party that was the opposing party to the one in power. Is that right?
They send confidential human sources in to do those.
Did anyone at DOJ, who at DOJ knew about this? Did the Attorney General know about this? Did the White House know about this?
Based on what we found, nobody had been told in advance.
But once
Nobody
it was
knew
happening,
about
did they know?
They did not. The only evidence that somebody knew were the line attorneys in NSD, in the National Security Division, when they were told very selective portions of what had occurred. Nobody knew beforehand. Nobody had been briefed, and frankly, that was one of the most concerning things here, is that nobody needed to be told.
And I can tell you from my time at the Department of Justice and from my time in law enforcement, any responsible leader, when hearing that you're talking about sending in spies and sending in a wiretap on any presidential nominee, should say, what in the are we doing? And by the way, the people up the chain who are saying we didn't know, if you had responsible leadership, there's no more important decision than you make. I can tell you when I was at DOJ, if someone said, let's tap Hillary Clinton, or let's tap Bill Clinton or John Kerry, the people there would have said, what in the are you talking about? What was going on here? This wasn't Jason Bourne. This was Beavis and Butthead.
All right, so Ted Cruz with the takeaway line there, but he's 100% right. And here's the thing. I really think in certain ways, even though I gripe about this happening at the same time the impeachment hearings are going on, in a certain way, it's kind of a blessing. And here's why. Think about what the Democrats are saying. They are saying that merely by mentioning foreign aid and a favor to the Ukrainian president in the same phone call, not even together, separated by a paragraph, separated by President Zelensky speaking, that him just saying both of those things within about a 8 to 10 minute phone call, that is an abuse of power, and that is President Trump sort of winking and nodding at the Ukrainian president that, hey, if you don't get us some dirt on Joe Biden, then we're not going to give. Now, I don't think I've given the case on that. I'm not going to go through it all. I've talked about impeachment enough this week and the weeks prior to give you my stance on that. So if you're interested in that, look somewhere else. But that is the case that they have made. That President Trump was kind of just sort of winking and nodding at a foreign leader to try to get some kind of dirt on his political opponent. The Obama administration is literally sending agents to top advisors in the Trump campaign. And that's fine. They have no problem with that. Do they not see the massive contradiction that they're involved in? That Trump just kind of afar with a foreign leader sort of mentioning that to him and saying, I want dirt on Biden, which I don't even think you can prove. I think at best you could make a case that he was saying, I want to find out about this corruption, and secretly he was also hoping that it led to Biden, but he never said that. He just said, let's get to the bottom of it and let the chips fall where they may. On the other hand, you've got the Obama administration breaking every freaking rule in the book to get a FISA warrant on the opposition, the leader of the opposition party, the nominee at the point. and actually sending people over there to gather dirt on the guy. Sending actual agents in there. And the Democrats don't see that as an abuse of power? They don't see that as something worthy of their time and consideration? Oh no, Obama was pure as the driven snow. Never would he do anything like that. He was the golden child, the anointed one. Take the scales off of your eyes, Democrats. Try to at least muster up, I don't know, a molecule of objectivity for a half second. And you'll see that there is a massive contradiction going on within you. If that's the stance that you're taking. That Obama can actually send people to spy on the guy at taxpayer expense. And that's not an abuse of power. Trump just kind of, according to you, I'm using your standards here, just kind of half-heartedly mentions that, hey, I'm doing an awful lot for you guys. Oh, and by the way, I would also like a favor. And that favor may lead to something on one guy that happens to be a political opponent, not the nominee right now, by the way, the front runner, but not the nominee yet. And in Trump's case, at least there was smoke. Like, you know, the saying that where there's smoke, there's fire. There's at least an awful lot of smoke when it comes to the Bidens. There's absolutely nothing that they have been able to justify because they had to lie all the way to get to the point to where they could even justify to a court to go into this. And like Ted Cruz was saying, that was really his point in that last clip. If we're going to go after a guy that is the nominee of the opposition party, we better have all our ducks in a row and know that we are above reproach at this point. Like, if you're going to go against a political opponent, you better make sure you've got everything and it is rock solid. And you better be ready to take your shot. And everything needs to be on the up and up and all of the T's crossed and the I's dotted before we even consider looking into a political opponent, because we know the first thing that people are going to ask is, was this partisan? Did we do something wrong? Did we make sure that we had a really, really good reason to go in here? And these guys not only didn't have a good reason, they just freaking made up a reason. It is absolutely astounding what the Democrats believe that they'll get away with. And the truth is they probably will, because they know the media is on their side, and they know the average American is not going to dig deep enough into this Inspector General report, especially when it's coming out in the news dead zone of the year. They know the average person is not going to look at this. And as much as I hate to say it, I think there's a really good chance that nothing ever comes from this, that no heads roll, that nobody gets kicked out. There may be some minor level bureaucrats in the Department of Justice that get severely disciplined or even fired, but you're not going to ever root this whole thing out. I don't think that it's possible now, because I don't think the American people will make it enough of a priority in their own life. They're not going to make it, they're not going to inform themselves and arm themselves with the information in their own life to hold their elected officials accountable for not saying, yeah, you can't do that. Sadly, I think that that's where we are. And I hate that, but I think that that's probably true. All right, so I have been looking forward to this next segment for some time, because we've hit a lot of super heavy stuff, not only today, but this week. But I have always considered myself a guy that likes to see silver linings and likes to see the good that comes out of things. And I know that my listeners may not always see it that way, but I really do. I like seeing the silver lining. I like to laugh. I really love listening to comedians or whatever. This has been one of the funniest news weeks I can remember in a really, really long time. And a lot of heavy stuff has happened, but a lot of really fun stuff has happened too. And so I'm going to give you some of the fun, and I'm just going to rapid fire these. We're going to do this instead of the Daily Dose of Stupid. We're just going to rapid fire these, but man, this has been a really funny week. And I'm going to give you two. We're going to start out at number 7, and we're going to lead up to what I think is the funniest story of the week. So this first one, it comes via Planned Parenthood, who tweets this out. And I don't really even have to give much commentary on this. The tweet just speaks for itself. I love that the best thing about following Planned Parenthood's Twitter, because of course you get the social justice warrior crap and you get all the other stuff, but the best thing about it is they have no self-awareness at all. Like they do not have an ounce of self-awareness, and they just sometimes like this tweet out things that are a complete contradiction to everything that Planned Parenthood stands for, and they don't even realize it. So here's a tweet from them earlier. Planned Parenthood action. Human rights for all, no exceptions. Hashtag Human Rights Day. And I know that this is very dark to be laughing at something like this, because I mean, it is an organization that is a more effective genocidal murderer than Adolf Hitler. So I get that it's coming from a dark place, but I mean, come on. The fact that they just have zero self-awareness whatsoever, you gotta kind of laugh at it to keep from crying, just because all, no exceptions, all human rights for all. It's like they're trying to shoot themselves in the foot. Like, of course, occasionally people shoot themselves in the foot just accidentally. They weren't paying attention. They didn't know the gun was loaded. Planned Parenthood, it almost seems like they're trying to shoot themselves in the foot. And if they accidentally don't shoot themselves in the foot, it's because they missed. All right, this next one. California passes the Crown Act. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, why would they pass a Crown Act? We actually have a provision in our Constitution that prevents any form of royalty. No, that's not the crown that they're talking about. This Crown Act apparently makes it illegal to discriminate against black people for wearing their natural hairstyle. Now, I've never known this to be a thing, and one of the reasons this is such an amusing article is that the woman that they use as their big example, because you know these stories, and I'm not bashing the way that they do this, because it's actually a smart way to run the story. They always try to find a victim of the injustice before the bill or law was signed in to give you sort of an idea of why this bill was necessary. With this one, they chose a lady that has her hair every day in dreadlocks, and her employer discriminated against her for wearing dreadlocks. And I was sitting there like, dreadlocks aren't natural. You have to, actually, it's a very extensive process to do dreadlocks. So there's a little bit of tone deafness there. And that's the thing. They didn't make a distinction between that. So anything that I guess is considered a black hairstyle is now protected under the Crown Act. It's very vague, and that's the reason I don't think that this Crown Act is really going to do very much of anything. But here's the thing. Your employer has the right to dictate your appearance to a certain degree. I'm a perfect example of that. I specifically cultivate a look, and I know that this surprises people because they're looking at it like, Caleb, you focus on your looks? No, I actually do, because it's important. I mean, like right now, I'm wearing my Woman of the Year shirt. See, I mean, if you started out watching this program, you know that I would wear just superhero shirts or whatever. My boss actually came to me, he's like, look, you need to either look professional or you need to wear some t-shirts that are political in nature and make some kind of joke or something like that. So you may have noticed, if you look through my more recent videos, I'm either wearing a button-down shirt or I'm wearing a t-shirt that has some kind of political message on it or something like that, which is fine. I don't mind that. They had me, they actually said something to me when I started off. It was like, look, you got to be more conscientious about your hair and your beard and everything. And so I started grooming them a little more closely. I, studied about that kind of thing. And there were employers in my past that weren't connected to the radio station before I was in radio that actually made me shave my beard because they didn't allow beards. Like, your employer has a right to engage in a contract with you where he says, there are certain rules here and you have to look professional. If you don't, we'll find somebody else to do the job. What they're trying to do here is try to blanketly say, well, anything that's considered a black style, you can't discriminate against it because of that. Well, what if it doesn't look professional? Now, some of them look very professional. Some of the most professional people that I know are black people. In fact, I've got one person in mind in particular who's actually been on the show before. That man is the sharpest dresser I've ever seen in my life. I mean, he looks good no matter where he's going. He's always got these really nice form-fitting suits, and I don't mean form-fitting like tight. I mean like you can tell they're tailored to his body type and everything. And he really worries about his appearance, and I don't think it's because he's vain. I think it's because of the line of work he's in. But, I mean, some of the best looking, best dressed, most professional looking people I know are black people. But you can't tell me that just, wearing some kind of crazy hairstyle that is obviously unprofessional, that just needs to be protected against all of it. But I just find it hilarious that they're doing this. I mean, come on, like I'm whiter than sour cream and I've had to change my hair styles or my beard for work. That's how it is. Another one, we'll go on down the list here. This is a really good one. Megan Fox, you may remember her from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies, if you're one of the 3 people that saw those movies, or if you've seen her from Transformers, the early ones, which people actually did watch. You'll remember Megan Fox as the actress in that. Very attractive lady. Not sure that she's a great actress, but, she's good looking enough. It doesn't really matter all that much, to be perfectly honest. She's also in New Girl. Yeah, that's a good show. She's a side character in New Girl. Megan Fox says that her kids go to vegan school. And this is via a magazine article from People where they did an interview with her. This is what Megan said about it. I'm very specific about never harming animals. We don't step on ants. We don't do things like that. We don't rip flowers out of the ground because we think they're beautiful. I teach them that plants are sentient beings, that they have thoughts and emotions. So that's what we're doing. Granted, I'm not an expert on veganism, but I thought the whole reason that people were vegans is because they believed that animals felt pain and had emotions and were sentient, and because of that, they didn't eat animals because they saw that would be the same as eating a human. Granted, maybe there's different reasons that people are vegan other than that, but I always thought that was kind of the reason that you go vegan, is because you don't ever want to bring harm to an animal because they can feel pain and they have emotions and all these other things. But if you're saying that and you're also saying that plants have emotions and are sentient, which is what Megan just said, if plants have feelings and thoughts and emotions, which is of course scientifically impossible, they don't have a nervous system. But if plants do that, then isn't eating plants wrong too? There seems to be a fairly obvious contradiction in your philosophy there, Megan Fox. I mean, if plants are sentient and have emotions and feelings and it's wrong to hurt them, or it's wrong to, as you say, rip a flower out of the ground, then wouldn't it be wrong to eat a plant too? Like, I guess maybe that's how Megan Fox stays so darn skinny. She doesn't eat meat and she doesn't eat plants. I guess Megan Fox just doesn't eat. That would explain why she looks so good. Some people, man. This is another quote by her from that same People article. My son accidentally stepped on a roly-poly once and he was devastated. We had a funeral for it. We did a ceremony, we buried it, we lit sage, and we released him back. So does she have a funeral for all the plants she eats? Because they're sentient and have feelings too. I'm sorry. Megan Fox tickles me so much. Look, ultimately life is an act of consumption. We're constantly consuming things to survive. That's just how life works. You have to consume plants, animals. You got to eat something. And you also have to consume things to have clothing. You have to consume things to have shelter. Like, this world exists with finite resources. And so to make anything in life, to survive, you have to expend those resources. No matter who you are, even if you're a caveman, at a certain point, you got to be, killing things to make skins for yourself, killing things to eat, killing plants to eat. Like, even if you're not killing animals, you're still killing plants. Life is an act of consumption. And some people have a really hard time with that, but they act as though not making it an act of consumption out of certain things is okay. Now, there are certain things that is, of course, wrong to consume. Cannibalism would obviously be wrong. Some of the things that the Nazis did with the Jews, making like lampshades out of human skin, things like that, that's obviously wrong. But to act as though the act of consumption is wrong is going to be inconsistent no matter who you are, because if you are breathing, if you are a living human being, you are consuming things to stay alive. And some people seem to have a really hard time understanding that, whether it's food, materials, energy. Just to keep warm through the winter, you've got to expend something, even if it's just wood. You're using up something as a resource. Another one, and you'd be surprised how low this one is on the list, because it's number 4. But I promise there are stories even funnier than this one. Time names Greta Thunberg the 2019 Person of the Year. And I don't even think I have to explain why that one's funny. Greta Thunberg, you may remember, she's the how dare you? She's the how dare you girl that was at the climate change. I thought I had that sound clip on retainer, but I guess I don't. But the how dare you thing, that's been made into a meme so many times. She's, I think, 16 or 17, maybe she's 17 now, and she spoke at the UN about climate change, global warming, the new ice age, whatever they're calling it these days. And she became a big news story. But here's a meme that a friend of mine, actually a buddy of mine that's not even an American, from the Ukraine, sent me this, which I thought was pretty fitting. For those of you listening on the radio, it's just they've photoshopped that time that they had to switch who the Miss Universe pageant was, because they called out the wrong name, and so they have time putting the crown on Trump for Person of the Year, and then they take it off and switch it to Greta Thunberg. Yeah, so that's another thing. And by the way, that was a friend of mine that isn't even an American. So the people that tell you that everybody outside America hates Trump, that's also not true. But I don't know, that the whole thing is funny, and Trump's already been Person of the Year once. I don't think that necessarily Trump needs to be Person of the Year. But here's the thing that drives me nuts about this. Like, the Person of the Year isn't necessarily somebody that is virtuous or good. So even if it's somebody you don't like, you can understand why somebody is Person of the Year. Barack Obama was Person of the Year. He's somebody that I politically disagree with a lot. There's no question he should have been Person of the Year. Like, the first black president, the way that he came in and basically with virtually no experience just handed Hillary Clinton's hat to her, and it wasn't even much of a contest. Like, that's a significant event in American history. Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, they've both been People of the Year before. It's not necessarily an honor we're saying, hey, this person is the best. You can be Person of the Year and not necessarily be a good person. So if she were a climate change activist that was really significant to the world this year, I could kind of see it, but she wasn't. Like, Greta Thunberg was in the news for 2, maybe 3 days, and then just kind of went away, and she made a circle around the wagons one last time when she got lost, because she doesn't ride on airplanes, and they're treating her as though she's this righteous climate warrior. She rode on a multi-million-dollar yacht to get to South America for the climate change thing. What a sacrifice that was. Anyway, she was in the news for maybe a grand total of a week out of the entire year. And she's Person of the Year? Really? Like, I could have seen a lot of different people, whether I agree with them politically or not, being person of the year. The impeachment proceeding, I think, would have justified either Adam Schiff, or we could even go with the Mueller report, Robert Mueller. I mean, how many weeks did we spend talking about Robert Mueller? I could easily see him being person of the year. I could see Adam Schiff being person of the year. Maybe Nancy Pelosi, but she hasn't been as directly involved in it, and so I kind of disagree with her being person of the year. Here's another thing. If you wanted Time Magazine to have a young person that makes a difference in the world, why not the young people in Hong Kong? And by the way, the person of the year can be a group that has been before. The American Soldier was person of the year one year, for example. Why not the people in Hong Kong right now that are fighting for their liberty against an incredibly oppressive government? Why not those people? They're not deserving of it, but Greta Thunberg, who has been in the news a grand total of a week this entire year and just made an impassioned yet delusional speech with no facts in it to the UN, she's deserving of person of the year, really? It doesn't make any sense. There have been person of the year decisions that I agreed with or disagreed with in the past, but this is the one I don't even understand. But I do think it's funny that she's in it. If anything, though, this is a testament to how people in the media are so far inside the bubble, they don't even realize how ridiculous they appear to people outside the bubble. They're so entrenched inside that media bubble, and they don't know anybody outside of it, they don't associate with people outside of it, that they don't realize how ridiculous it is to the average person, most people right or left, to say that Greta Thunberg is person of the year. Like, to them, she really is the child savior of their religion, and they don't understand why other people would even question why she should be person of the year. Like I said, there's been plenty of people politically I disagree with that could be person of the year. She's not one of them. So speaking of people I disagree with, this is another good one. Megan Rapinoe. Megan Rapinoe, you may remember, she was in the news this year. Heck, Megan Rapinoe is more deserving of person of the year than Greta Thunberg. But anyway, Megan Rapinoe was the female soccer player that made headlines and was in the news for months on end about how women soccer players don't get paid as much as men, which is, makes sense because they bring in significantly less than the men. But anyway, she was named sports person of the year by Sports Illustrated. And what's hysterical is she got on stage and immediately started bashing Sports Illustrated for their lack of diversity. She said, and this is a quote, "Is it truth that I am only the fourth woman deserving of this award? I don't think so. Is it true so few writers of color deserve to be featured in this publication? No. Is it true that women's voices deserve to be heard and deserve to be read in this publication? I don't think so." So immediately she goes for the jugular. They hand her this award. They hand her the mic. "Hey, Megan Rapinoe, you're our sports person of the year." You know what's terrible? How Sports Illustrated has so few writers that are of minority status and so few female writers, and that I'm only the fourth person that has ever won sports person of the year. She immediately turned on him, and it was hysterical. And this is what I said about her back when all this was happening, and her team wound up winning the Women's World Cup. No sense of gratitude, no sense of thanks, gratifying herself saying, "No, I deserve this." That's an actual quote from her. And I said then, this is a person that has not a grateful bone in her body. She believes herself to be the center of the universe. And this is further proof of that. Rather than being like, "Thanks for the award, I appreciate it." Even if she had been somewhat critical of them in the speech, I still think that would be inappropriate, but, what are you going to do? But no, immediately goes straight for the jugular. But here's the thing. I feel no sympathy for Sports Illustrated at all. And here's why. If you give the award to a frog, you can't be mad at the frog for croaking. I mean, this is Megan Rapinoe. This is what she does. She kicks a ball, and she gripes about how women are underpaid. Like, that's the only two things she is humanly capable of doing. And you're really shocked when you bring her on stage and she talks about how terrible you are. This is what the woman does. to you, go back to my frog analogy, that comes from an old proverb, like the frog gives a ride to the scorpion across a pond, and then the scorpion says, if you give me a ride, I won't sting you. And then, of course, they get to the other side of the pond, and the first thing the scorpion does is sting them. And the frog says, but you said you wouldn't sting me. He goes, I'm a scorpion. It's in my nature. That's what Megan Rapinoe is. She doesn't know how to not do this. And so Sports Illustrated, you get what you deserve. But I will say this too. This is an important lesson for people like Chick-fil-A who cave to the rainbow jihad, who cave to the social justice warriors and think that they can appease them. You're never going to appease them. It doesn't matter what you do. They are constantly searching for things to be offended about. You cannot satisfy a person like that. I don't know how many times I have to say it. You cannot satisfy a person like that. They will always be angry. They will always blame you. They're never going to be grateful. They're never going to be glad that you capitulate. In their own head, you were supposed to bow down and kiss their ring to begin with. And for the very sin of not doing that immediately, they're just never going to accept you. It is hilarious how the movement that's supposed to be all about tolerance and acceptance will never accept anybody, even when the person converts to their side. Chick-fil-A is never going to appease the gay crowd, and neither is Sports Illustrated. It doesn't matter who you are. This brings me to number 2. And this one is really good. So the Trump campaign put out a meme that drove the left nuts, and then the left reacted by going nuts. So here is CNN's Don Lemon reacting to this meme. And so I'll give commentary on both sides of this, but this is Don Lemon's reaction to it. He'll show the clip and then he'll show his commentary.
In addition to all the lies and all the blustering at tonight's rally, Trump's war room posted a meme on Twitter today showing Trump as the supervillain Thanos from the Marvel Avengers movies, dispatching his Democratic enemies. Take a look at this.
I am inevitable.
On this solemn day, I recall that the first order of business for members of
What are we in junior high school? Like, what the hell? What is this?
You broke Don Lemon.
Like, what? I cannot believe that I'm even having to report this on the news.
I can't believe you're still on the news.
This is crazy. This is literally crazy. Are you people insane? Are you insane? Go ahead. Troll the Democrats on Twitter. Do this stupid, silly, you know what? Play this stupid, juvenile meme game. History won't record this meme, stupid crap.
It might.
But history will record this. The seriousness of what is happening. That today is the day that the House of Representatives in the United States of America introduced articles of impeachment against President Donald J. Trump, the President of the United States of America, for committing high crimes and misdemeanors.
All right, so there have been very few stories I enjoyed doing more than this one. And I'm about to tick off both sides. I know it's my thing. It's what I do. I'm about to tick off both sides when it comes to this story. Because first of all, Don Lemon, though his reaction is stupid, he is making a point that is not completely without merit. Politically, it is incredibly stupid to paint yourself as the most notorious mass murderer in American pop culture, with the possible exception of Darkseid. And the reason, look, I like Marvel more than DC as a general rule, even though I do really love Superman. But Darkseid wants to eliminate the entire universe with the anti-life equation. Thanos wants to kill half of it. So by definition, Darkseid is the bigger bad than Thanos. So Thanos wants to murder literally half the entire universe, and Trump's team thought it was a good idea to put Trump's face over Thanos and him saying, "I'm inevitable," snapping his finger, and the Democrats get dusted. No, that's a really, really stupid move. Now, is the meme funny? Yeah, it actually is kind of funny, but it's still not politically a smart move to do. And I would be a little bit more forgiving of that if this were not a movie where literally not even a whole second after that clip that they just took of Thanos snapping his fingers and having Trump's face over it, if there were not 2 seconds later another character who is the hero of that movie, who is a billionaire. Like, they couldn't have made a better scenario for President Trump than putting his face over Iron Man and having him say, "Well, I'm Iron Man." And then all the bad guys go away, because that happens literally a second later in that movie. Why not use that? Because Tony Stark, a billionaire that leads a hedonistic lifestyle until he's actually faced some responsibility and then makes all the bad guys go away. Donald Trump, a billionaire who spends most of his life living a hedonistic lifestyle until he has some responsibility that he takes up, and is now fighting the Democrats. Like, there's a pretty strong parallel there, and I don't know why. Why on earth would you put your face in front of Thanos when you actually correlate much more strongly to Iron Man? I mean, the guy who's kind of arrogant, he's a narcissist, he's kind of a jerk to people, but he is fighting for the right side, and winds up, though he's a billionaire, I mean, the parallels are staggering. And they don't, like, do I have to do everything for you people? Do you want me to just come down there and be in charge of memes? Like, is that really what we've come to? This is not that hard, y'all. You can do this. Just think before you put things out. Because you wouldn't even have to change the second part of that clip. The second part of that clip where the Democrats just dust away like the Avengers did in the first one. Because if you know the movie, you know in that scene where he goes, "I'm inevitable," and snaps his finger, you know that it doesn't work because the Infinity Gauntlet, the gems have been stolen by Iron Man at that point. I do apologize for if you're one of the 3 people in America that have not seen the movie. I do realize I just kind of spoiled the end of that movie. But if you're Iron Man, like, why not use that? Because Thanos is the bad guy and loses. Iron Man is the good guy and wins. You wouldn't even have to change the second part of that clip. Just literally make the clip go 3-4 seconds into the future and then play Iron Man doing that and put Trump's face in front of that. Then it's perfect. Then it's golden. How did nobody that was in charge of making this thing not think of that? That was incredibly stupid. All right, now the other side of that. Even though the meme is definitely flawed, and I just pointed out all those flaws, Don Lemon's overreaction to it is just the best. I mean, they broke Don Lemon. Don Lemon doesn't know what to say. He's like, are you in high school? How dare you? It proves 2 things. First of all, it proves that Don Lemon has absolutely no knowledge about the Marvel universe. Like, he watching him try to describe it, he's like the villain of the Marvel's Avengers movie. Like, you can tell the guy doesn't know anything. He's not tuned into pop culture. He's not a comics fan. he doesn't know the stuff that the average everyday American works, because the guy works in an ivory tower. And just like the people at Time Magazine, he's so entrenched in that little media bubble and doesn't speak to the unwashed masses, the peasants out there in flyover country, to know what movies are popular, that he can't even name the villain of the most profitable movie of all time. So, first of all, Don Lemon just proves that he knows absolutely nothing about Marvel Comics or really American culture in general. The second part of that, because it does show what a pompous jerk he is, the second part of that is that Don Lemon really proves himself as the snide, unlikable jerk that has not an ounce of... I mean, if you were to do an MRI to find Don Lemon's sense of humor, believe me, it'd come up empty no matter how advanced the MRIs. I know MRIs can't find senses of humor. That's the joke, and Don Lemon wouldn't have gotten it. So... Don Lemon just does not have a sense of humor, because the meme is still funny. Very flawed, but it's still pretty funny. And it would have been funny even if it had been the reverse. Like, it's still a funny thing, but Don Lemon is just so aghast and disgusted and taken aback. Oh, how could you ever do this? It's like, dude, chill out. Like, not everything has to be about that. Just take a chill pill, bro. The overreaction is just absolutely golden by Don Lemon. And then, finally, the funniest story of the week. Pigeons. That's right, pigeons. Pigeons in Las Vegas are now wearing cowboy hats. And I know this sounds like something that Caleb made up, but I promise this is a real thing. You can check it out here. Pigeons wearing cowboy hats. There we go. So in Las Vegas, people just started noticing that there are pigeons wandering around with tiny cowboy hats on. There are so many questions I have about the cowboy pigeons. Why? How? Whose idea was this? What purpose does it serve? Are there going to be cowboy pigeons in other cities? But we don't really know that, because we don't know who is putting the cowboy hats on the pigeons. But there is a pigeon rescue. Yes, these things apparently actually exist. There is a pigeon rescue group called Lofty Hopes. And they say that the hats were glued on. So I guess that does kind of answer the how. I don't know if they're like little plastic hard hats or doll hats, maybe. I'm not sure. But they said that the hats were glued on. And of course, I don't endorse on any level doing something like that to an animal, because I'm sure that it hurts them and wouldn't want them to do that. But I mean, you have to admit, the thing is freaking amusing. And CNN got a quote from Lofty Hopes, the Pigeon Rescue Association. I really had no idea this was a thing. The rescue group put on traps to try to nab the birds, dubbed Chuck Norris in the red hat and Calamity Jane in the pink lit. Okay, so even Lofty Hopes is having some fun with this. They've tried to catch the birds so that they can remove the hat so that the birds, aren't hurt or whatever. But, I mean, I read that wrong. I'm sorry. Cluck Norris and Calamity Jane. You get it? So even the pigeon rights group that are upset about this, even they're having some fun with it. And that's what should happen. I don't want any harm to come to the birds per se. I mean, it's a pigeon, so it's, not like a dog or something, but still, there's no reason to needlessly harm an animal. But you have to admit, the thing is pretty amusing. All right, let's go to the chaplain's report.
In 1775, the Continental Congress created the Chaplain Corps. Under the command of General George Washington, each soldier was required to attend worship service every Sunday. While other armies advanced on their feet, Washington's troops advanced on their knees. It's time for the Chaplain's Report with Caleb Colquitt on Tactics.
After that string of 7 comedy stories, I got to get myself serious here real quick. But we do have a pretty serious matter on this, because I think that sometimes we just need to get back to the basics in our spiritual lives and sort of refocus and recenter. This is a really great story. And it talks about Mary and some of the other women going to Jesus' tomb after, of course, he's been crucified. And they're doing what Jewish women of their time would have done with a newly deceased. They bring spices and herbs and things to try to keep the body from decaying in a way that would be too quickly. And what they would do is they would wait for the body to decay, and then they'd move the bones into the side of the tomb or whatever. I'm not going to get into all the details, but essentially they're doing something that helps preserve the body to make the burial process a little easier. And so that's why they arrive at Jesus' tomb early, not that morning, because the Sabbath would have been the morning after Jesus is laid in the tomb. They're not allowed to do work on the Sabbath day, so they wait until the next morning, Sunday morning, to go, and that is, of course, when they find the tomb empty and angels standing guard at the tomb. And I want to bring your attention to the verses after that where the angels are giving an explanation for what has happened. And this comes from Luke 24, verses 5 through 7. And as the women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground, the men said to them, "Why do you seek the living one among the dead? He is not here, but he has risen. Remember how he spoke to you while he was still in Galilee, saying that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men, and be crucified, and the third day rise again." The part of that verse that I really want to focus in on is where the angel asks, "Why are you seeking the living among the dead?" Because I think that there are broader implications of that, because of course that was a direct question, and a good one, at the women in that situation at that time. But I think it's one that is pertinent and applies to us today. Because I think that we have a habit of seeking the living amongst the dead. How often do we do this? And I'm talking about it in a general sense. How often are we seeking heavenly things in earthly places, and then we're somewhat surprised when we don't find them there? There are places that we know we should not go. Whether it's physical places, places in our mind. I know one that affects my generation quite a bit, places on the internet that we know we're not supposed to go there. We know that we shouldn't be there. There's a old Bible song from, or Bible school song, I should say, sorry, that little kids learn. Grandmother taught this one to me when I was probably 2 or 3. It's, be careful little hands what you do, be careful little feet where you go, be careful little mouth what you say. It's not an uncommon thing for Christians to go to places where we should have enough common sense to know we're going into a place of the dead. We are walking into a place filled with corruption and evil and dead people. Now, sometimes that's not always necessarily a bad thing, because sometimes you have to go where the sinners are, and I get that. But if we're going into a place where we know we're going to be tempted, and we're putting ourselves in bad situations that we do not need to be in, and we're lying to ourselves about being able to stay spiritually strong and be able to do that, how often do we seek the living amongst the dead? How often do we seek people in Christ, good Christian people, amongst the dead? I remember a story of a friend of mine that he had kind of fallen away from the faith. And one of the things that kind of helped wake him up, because he got really into alcohol. And it was, he went into he had done a lot of drinking, like privately around people that he knew, but he decided that he wanted something to drink and there was nobody around to drink with him, so he goes to a bar. And he sat down in the bar and he struck up a conversation with a couple of the guys there, and he just, because it had been his reflex his entire life, he asked, one of the guys sitting there is like, so where do you go to church? Just trying to make small talk. And the guy looks at him kind of funny and kind of confused and says, we don't really go to church. It wasn't just that he didn't go to church. It was that it struck him as odd that somebody would even ask in a bar where you go to church. Now, granted, I'm not saying that, anybody that sets foot in a bar is automatically doomed to hell or anything like that. That's not the point of the story. That's not what I'm getting at. What I'm saying is, this was a guy that was seeking life in a dead place. He was seeking after godly things. He assumed that there were going to be devout, devoted Christians in a place where everybody there was confused as to why he even thought that was going to be a possibility. And how often do we do that? Ignore our better instincts and go into a place where we know we shouldn't be. And then we act surprised that people react to us in such a way like, no, that's, that God thing's not really our thing. We do it with social media. We do it all the time. And I think that we need to be more aware of our surroundings in that. But getting more specific to this story, how often do we seek Jesus in a dead place? Because we're looking for God. And that's what Jesus was, God in the flesh. How often do we look for a Savior in things that are not Jesus and we know that we're not supposed to be looking there? Whatever it is that we turn to, whatever our pet sin is. We're lonely and unfulfilled. So we start seeking out things that we shouldn't be seeking out. Maybe you're having troubles with your kids or your wife and you start talking to some woman at work or some woman you met at the gym, or, reverse the gender there. Some woman doing that with a man that she met. We start looking for things that are not God to replace God in our life. And if our conscience has been trained correctly, all of a sudden we're going to hear in the back of our head, yeah, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? I know countless times I have done this to myself. That I have, and I'm sure that all of you have too, started seeking out some kind of fulfillment, some type of purpose in my life. And I had the answer the whole time. But because I got focused on something that I didn't have, or got focused on something bad that was going on in my life, I started to ignore that and started looking for fulfillment in places that were not God. It doesn't work. You are looking for life in a grave. And the sooner you realize that, the sooner you're going to realize Jesus is the God of life. He's somewhere else. And if I want to be alive, and if I want to have a fulfilling life, I got to be somewhere other than here. Because the last place I need to be looking for someone who's alive is in a grave. And what's the answer to that? Because I'm going to tell you right now, if your God is the political realm, and politics is probably pretty important to you if you listen to my program, but politics is not my God. Who wins the next election is not going to affect my spirituality. When it comes to entertainment, I like movies. I like video games. They're not my God. And sometimes I have to remind myself of that. But whether or not I never see a movie or play a video game again in my life, in the grand scheme of things, really doesn't matter all that much. Any number of things can be our God. But I'll tell you one thing. Jesus is not in the realm of politics, and he is not in the entertainment world. And there's a whole bunch of other places that he isn't either. He's not at the bottom of a bottle. He's not in the end of a syringe. He's not in some kind of self-help book. If you want to know Jesus, he's in the Bible. And see, that's the solution that is given here by the angel. Now, he's not chastising them because they are actually seeking Jesus, and that's a step in the right direction. But you'll notice what he says there is he says, do you remember how we spoke to you in Galilee? Like, he's saying, this shouldn't be a surprise to y'all. Jesus told you what was going to happen. And he was pretty emphatic about it. And then the reaction to them is that they remembered these words. You see, this was the issue. We've heard the words of Jesus too, if you're somebody that has studied the Bible. But either we weren't paying attention, or we used to have this message down and we forgot and we let the cares of the world come into our life. And so, what is the step really that we need to do to find Jesus, to go to that living place and to remember how to find him? It's pretty simple. We do exactly what Mary and the other people gathered there should have done. Hear the word. Hear the words that Jesus told them in Galilee. Believe in it. And then act upon it. Because they had to believe that Jesus was going to rise from the dead, and they also had to act upon it. They had to take that information and use it to seek him in a different place. See, if they'd done that from the beginning, they wouldn't have wasted their time coming to that empty tomb. They would have known that Jesus was up walking around somewhere because he said he was going to rise after 3 days. And so if we want to be people that aren't looking for Jesus in a grave, looking for Jesus in a dead place, looking for something other than God to replace God, that's really as simple as it is. Hear, believe, and then act upon it. In other words, obey and do what Jesus asks us to do. If we do that, we will find life, because Jesus is the life. Stay the course, friends.
Tactics is a production of News Radio 1440 and Cumulus Media Montgomery. Any opinions expressed on this program are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Cumulus Media. The theme song for Tactics is 6 Foot Town by Big and Rich. Graphics by Jessica Dawson. Broadcast studios provided by Cumulus Media Montgomery. Location studios provided by the Dalraida Church of Christ. Copyright 2019.